everybody. I want to welcome you back to Better Understandings of Science and our lecture series in scientific and technical communication. Today we are going to be discussing the ethical issues and how we weigh those. By the time we finish this lecture, I'm hoping that we can achieve some certain learning objectives. First, we want to be able to understand the major causes of unethical workplace communication. We want to be able to recognize common types of workplace communication abuses, understand the ethical issues related to digital communication, use critical thinking to solve ethical dilemmas, know the limitations of legal guidelines and avoid plagiarism, and determine when and how to report ethical violations. So first, let's talk about ethics, okay? When you're providing information or persuading an audience, you always have to ensure that your writing is also ethical. It's got to be accurate, honest, and fair. Unethical communication in the workplace is pretty common. Ethics are not always black and white, but there are some unethical scenarios. If you all can remember back to our last lecture, when we were talking about persuasion and persuading the audience, there is a heavy distinction between ethics and law. Just because something is ethical doesn't mean it's a law, and vice versa. Just because it's a law doesn't make it ethical. So you have to keep that in mind when you're thinking in context of this. And remember that it's absolutely not black and white. So here are some unethical scenarios that you might think of. A person lands a great job. They exaggerated their credentials, experience, or expertise. Okay, we will have an assignment a little later on in the semester where this happens, and I've taken some examples from popular political and celebrity folks that have used lying in resumes and such and things like that. Another scenario might be a marketing specialist for a chemical company negotiates a huge bulk sale of its powerful new pesticide by downplaying its carcinogenic effects. You can see that this happens through lobbying in Washington, specifically when it comes to big chemical companies. And something that is touched on that I would recommend that you would read Merchants of Doubt by Naomi Oreskes, and she discusses this a little bit more in depth. I would love to make that required reading for this class, but you're grown-ups, I think you could do it yourselves. Another scenario might be a manager writes a strong recommendation to get a friend promoted while overlooking someone that might be more deserving or better suited for that position. So you have to know what the major causes of unethical communication are going to be, and unethical communications are usually the result of one of two factors. Either it's going to be yielding to social pressure, looking the other way. Everybody in the department does it, even if it's not ethical for them to do it. Everybody does it just to kind of save time and whatnot. So usually we will perform unethical acts based on what we see. And then mistaking groupthink for teamwork and blindly following the group. An instance that this pops up is often in different cultures. In fact, we had talked about in persuading audiences, we had talked about the notion of saving face within cultures. And this is another point that comes up often where some cultures tend to think that by going against the group as a whole is dishonorable, or it is something that is very taboo. I actually had a student from another country in one of my classes, and for one of the they all had these team projects that they had to do. And for one of the team projects, the group that he was in decided that they were going to test different ammunition within a certain rifle. And this student agreed wholeheartedly. Now, I pulled that student off to the side and we started talking a little bit more about it, and they expressed to me their fear and disinterest and distaste for doing that. And I asked that person, I said, well, why would you continue down that path? And he said it was because everyone else in my group wanted to do it and I didn't want to take away from what they wanted. So it's important to consider groupthink, and consider that just because people are following along, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are wholeheartedly behind it. You also see this in politics here lately as well, where you've got blind loyalty or blindly following any person into even the most dangerous of tasks or dangerous of instances. Types of communication abuse in the workplace. Workplace communication influences the thinking, actions, and welfare of numerous people: customers, investors, co-workers, the public, policymakers, so on and so forth. These people are victims of communication abuse whenever we give them information that is less than the truth as we know it. Some examples can be, suppressing knowledge that the public might need. As some of you might understand it as lying by omission. Even if it is an omission, it is still a lie, okay? By suppressing knowledge or withholding information, you are lying and moving unethically towards, as a speaker or as a technical communicator. Another one is hiding conflicts of interest. And this is a real world example where a particular lobbyist for a drug company actually sat on a governing body, sat on the board of the FDA for a certain amount of time, and that creates some serious tensions and some serious conflicts of interest. Another one would be exaggerating claims about any technology, and lastly, falsifying or fabricating data. This is definitely a no-no. This is something that happens all too often, and it can have two really detrimental effects. One, falsifying and fabricating data, it legitimately can endanger the public or endanger people, and or even have the threat of death. They may have the threat of death. It could be any number of things that could be a problem there. But also, it damages science. Falsifying and fabricating data sets science back, and it makes science seem not the prestigious field that it should be. So when people go out, they're not just marring their own personal credentials. It puts a mar on all of us, and it makes us, as communicators of science and scientists, it makes us have to work that extra mile, work a little harder to overtake that. Recently, there was a lot of, if you can remember back a little while back, the Amazon forest was burning, and you had celebrities come out and start talking about how the Amazon was the lungs of the earth. Well, that's not entirely accurate, and we're talking there about falsifying and fabricating data. Technically, it's more like a liver. It holds a lot of the CO2 and all that stuff. Now, granted, if the trees were gone, a lot of that CO2 could escape, but it's not really giving any oxygen to us. We don't get a whole lot there. It's almost a push as far as the oxygen goes. So when it comes to these things, and then when I go out and I found myself in a scientific subreddit where I was speaking on this matter and trying to clear up some, and I was providing some evidence and providing some credible research from prominent universities and scientists that was backing my claims and saying that. I actually had a couple of people who got upset with me about what they called scientific semantics. That's a problem, okay? It's not simply about semantics. It's not, if we go and we start sweeping a little bit of stuff under the rug here and there, it's a detriment to science as a whole. So being clear and being honest, and if you ask me, the fact that, it's more like this thing that kind of like holds all the poisons and everything, the CO2, into the, into its canopies and into the soil and all that stuff, that's very important, because if those trees are gone, we're on a runaway course towards Venus, right? So it's just as important, but the data needs to be accurate. The data needs to be true. You also want to understand, too, that workplace communication influences the thinking, actions, and welfare of numerous people: customers, investors, co-workers, the public, policy makers, so on and so forth. These people are victims of that same communication abuse whenever we give them information that's less than the truth as we know it, such as using visual images that might conceal the truth, or doctored images, stealing or divulging proprietary information from somewhere else. Often when something is stolen, you are stealing it and losing context. Another is withholding information people need for their jobs to be able to perform their jobs. And exploiting cultural differences, taking advantage, if we go back to the student that I had from another country, if the rest of the people in his group, saw that he couldn't turn down what they wanted to do and they persevered, they kept going and wanted to do it anyway, that's exploiting a cultural difference, okay? So understand that those things can be looked at as less than truth. So ethical issues with social and digital media is really prominent right now. The ever-increasing amount of personal information stored in digital formats, it requires anybody working as part of a communication team to consider digital ethical issues, and these can range. These are like failing to safeguard the privacy of personal information about a website, visitors' health, finances, buying habits, or affiliations, or providing customers with little to no information about how their personal data is going to be used, either on a website or in any other situation. It's also going to require consideration for things such as examples like ignoring any data breaches that are observed in the workplace, offering inaccurate or unsubstantiated medical advice online. Okay, if you don't have a legitimate background in that, if you're not an expert, chances are you should probably limit what you say. Leaving out any cautions or warnings in a frequently asked questions or online help system about digital information used by the product or the company can also be an issue. Another thing could be purposely using unclear language in a website privacy statement, or making the privacy information difficult to find, or just leaving it out altogether. And this is something that has taken tremendous focus in websites and in the digital age. In fact, it was so problematic that the information was so all-encompassing and just so convoluted that there was a law passed during the presidency of Barack Obama that was a plain speak law, a law that was meant to force governments and things of that nature in their law to make the language easier to understand, easier to follow, and clearer. Another one might be publishing anonymous attacks or smear campaigns against people, products, or organizations. Creating a Facebook post or tweet that is only partially accurate in order to get people to repost it. And we've seen this in the day of the memes. Best ways to confront these ethical dilemmas on the job especially is to use your critical thinking skills. Okay? Keep in mind reasonable criteria. These are going to be standards that most people consider acceptable. things like obligations, okay? These obligations, these are the responsibilities you have to everyone involved, yourself, clients, and customers, your company, your coworkers, the community, society, all of that. You have these obligations, these ethical obligations. Also keep in mind ideals. Ideals are the values that you believe in or you stand for. And that's going to be things such as loyalty, friendship, compassion, dignity, fairness. Keep in mind that we want to understand that these ideals should not often conflict with obligations. Or if they are, we have a serious ethical conundrum. And again, I would implore you to bring in some very serious critical thinking skills on how you move forward. Another thing, some more reasonable criteria might be something like the consequences, and that's going to be the beneficial or harmful results of your actions. What's going to happen if this goes through? And it might be something that's going to be immediate, it might be delayed, it might be intentional or unintentional, it might be obvious or subtle. Okay, so you have to consider consequences from all these different perspectives. You need to learn to recognize legal issues and plagiarism. Okay, legal guidelines, they don't often go far enough to measure unethical behavior. Again, ethics and the law don't always cross. Okay, they don't always come together for any number of reasons. But there are laws in place to regulate workplace communication to a certain degree. Okay, you have laws against deception. There are laws against libel, laws against protecting employee privacy, copyright laws, laws against stealing or revealing trade secrets, laws against deceptive or fraudulent advertising, liability laws, and so on. Ethical communication, it includes giving proper credit to the work of others. Okay. And again, in some cultures, plagiarism isn't looked at so much in that perspective. Plagiarism might be non-existent in other cultures. In fact, some cultures believe that once you have created a document or you've created some kind of information, that once that information is published, it is then public knowledge, okay? And it cannot ever be used, it can never be plagiarized. However, in modern business association, in modern business workings, and in Western culture, for the most part, plagiarism is very serious, and that is going to be representing the words, ideas, or perspectives of others as your own. It's a serious breach of ethics. It can be blatant or unintentional. Again, other cultures coming to the United States. I used to work many years ago. I used to work in a tutoring center, and it was pretty often that I had to explain what plagiarism was to cultures coming from other countries. They had no idea or understanding about what it was. So and the internet has only done more to make plagiarism easier than ever before. However, it's also made it easier to catch. So keep that in mind for all you folks out there taking my class, looking to write papers. You have to decide, really, you're going to have to walk a tightrope when it comes to deciding on how and when to report certain ethical abuses. And you have to understand, again, here's where that ethics and law conflicts sometimes. Okay, whistleblowing, and that's going to be reporting someone else's ethical abuses, but you have to keep in mind it's tricky because it can backfire on you, and you are not always legally protected from the consequences. Again, if we look back to our previous discussions, there was an issue with banks going out and creating false accounts using their customer base. And some customers had multiple accounts that they didn't even know about. And someone blew the whistle on this. Yes, it did get those banks in trouble. It did bring down some, it did hurt the image. It tarnished the image of that company. However, the people who blew that whistle were not protected and lost their jobs. Okay, so think very carefully about deciding when and how to report unethical situations in the workplace. That's not telling you to don't go out and be good people. I implore you to do so. If given the chance, thinking of my own ethical and moral philosophy, I would definitely call folks out, job be damned, if I had to. So make sure that you keep in mind, because, and the reason why is because sometimes this can cost lives. So also you need to consider satisfying the audience's information needs. Give the audience everything it needs to know. Don't just hold things back. Okay, give people a clear understanding of what the information means. Don't be deceptive. Don't be convoluted. This is not a place to grandstand on your speaking skills. This is not the place to go out and flex your verbal muscles and all that good stuff. Instead, why don't you just keep it clear, let people know what you're talking about, okay? When you take a stand versus a company or something that you're working for, you better make sure that you get your facts straight, okay? And you better keep a very detailed record. Remember that a lot of the emails and things that are going to be going across company servers and things are going to have a server record. That server record may not benefit you, so maybe it would behoove you to back up that data onto a flash drive if you ever have to. Make sure that you appeal your case in terms of the company's interests. And this could be, bringing these things to light may be as simple as going out and saying, listen, some things are going on that may not be up to par, up to snuff. It's going to be in our best interest as a company to go out and be ethical in these situations and try to navigate that very carefully. Again, that's not going to be bulletproof by any means, and it could still cause issues with retaliation from the top down. Aim your appeals to the right person. Don't aim this at people who have no authority or no way of acting on your behalf. Many companies have a good open door policy. I suggest you use those open doors. If those open doors tend to not be where you need to go to the next and use your chain of command. And always make sure that you're getting legal advice when it comes to this stuff. Find out what protections you have or what that company may have as far as protections go, and try to do your due diligence so that you can both save face and potentially save career. When you leave that job, if you leave that job due to some kind of ethical issue or ethical conundrum, you want to make sure that you ain't making waves. Do not burn bridges on your way out the door, okay? Some of these folks aren't going to remain at that company either. They may find themselves in a future company that you're with. And making waves tends to cause backlash later on. Furthermore, these folks are also going to be people who are going to be giving you any kind of references that you might need in the future. And not only that, other companies may look at what happened at your previous job and may not blatantly or outright say it, but may withhold giving you another job based on that material. And make sure that when you leave, you're leaving all proprietary information behind. Saying that you're going to take the Colonel Secret recipe to go to Church's Chicken would definitely be a detriment, legally speaking, because their information is going to be protected. And that information can get you and the company you're going to in hot water. Okay? With that said, I would like to thank you for attending the lecture here for Better Understandings of Science and our lecture series on scientific and technical communication. If you have any questions or comments, please leave it in the comments section below, or if you're one of my students, please feel free to email me and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Other than that, thank you all for attending the lecture, and I can't wait to see you guys next time. Have a great one.